On today's show, we're going to be talking about source of truth. With Figma leaning more and more into the dev space with things like dev mode and code connect, is it time to make Figma the source of truth in your design system for your design system? Oh, spicy topic. I'm Luke Murphy, and I'm joined by my co-host Michelle Chin. We're both design advocates at zeroheight, the design system management platform, and this is Design Systems WTF. So this one was I put this in because I was lucky enough to get the little pre-briefing on all the Code Connect stuff. And it's really interesting with Figma releasing dev mode, um, a year ago now, I think they released it. And
Yeah.
sort of seeing this, they talk about this internally as a separate product to Figma, Figma dev mode. And clearly they're like leaning into this more and more. They're trying to get engineers on board with using Figma and using it as like the ideal like collaboration tool when it comes to building products. And then they recently launched, so 2 weeks ago, they released Code Connect Framework, which is their way of actually pulling real life code into Figma, so that when you're looking at a component with variations and whatnot, it's actually showing you the live, like say React code or whatever it is, with all of the props and props associated with the things in Figma, which is like pretty cool as a concept. And I do feel like that this is going to be pushing more and more people into considering Figma as a tool as your like primary source of truth for design systems. And so I don't know, I thought because I think it's been a spicy topic for like, well, since design systems have been a thing as to like where your source of truth is. And I know I've got into countless arguments about it. So I thought I'd dive into it now. As usual, we'll chat about this. But if the live audience who are currently watching have any questions, please chuck them in the Q&A and we'll get to those towards the end of the podcast. But supposed to start off with, like Michelle, where do you think the source of truth should be? Taking off your zero height hat for a second.
So I think, and this is biased because I am at zero height, but I feel like you want like a neutral
Yeah.
territory, right? Like, because like it came out as a design tool, and so it's got the design perspective and stigma associated with it, which isn't a bad thing. But then to like fold developers in, it kind of feels like for a developer, it's like, okay, so I'm going into a design tool. Um, so I think there is that bias, but it's the same thing as like if a designer were to like go do stuff in GitHub for documentation like that, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I don't understand this world." So, I think like a neutral space, right? Like even if it was like a Word doc, I mean, granted, like a Word doc is not like scalable like that well in terms of like what you're trying to do, but it's kind of like a tool everyone can use.
I
Yeah.
I I mean, again, I wish that I had a spicier take here, but I 100% agree. I think that actually neutral tools for like documentation and even though we hate the word handoff, but like handoff, handshaking. I think that's what Brad Frost was trying to rebrand it to. Um, but like the mutual tool, the tools that are agnostic to what role you are, is where the things like documentation, which is supposed to be consumed by like all parties because they define not only how you like pull things together and like usage when you're like thinking about the design constraints when you're trying to like pull together new screens or new components or whatever it is, right through to like how to actually implement it in code. Like I think that that needs to live in an agnostic place. And I think that not only that, I actually think that the one of the big ones as well is like having an agnostic place for people to contribute to the documentation as well, because otherwise it's unbalanced and you've got either the designers sort of like owning the space because it's in their natural tool of choice and their natural home, or you've got the developers, as you said, like GitHub, or even doing it in Storybook as well. I love Storybook. I think Storybook is a godsend, and I would advocate for its use on any design system. Having it as the sole part of your design system or like as the source of truth on the design system, I just feel like it's a bit of a dangerous. It's basically it is saying a little bit to designers like, nah, you're not really welcome here. Or if yeah, you can come and contribute here, but you have to learn how to do it our way, and you have to play
Yeah.
it. You have to play the
And
game in our way.
and there are a lot of rules to this game, and it's not fun. Because I think that's the thing is, like, during from previous How We Document surveys,
Yeah.
people, like, who had code-based or, had their own design system, documentation, like, spun up like a standalone platform, um, they would have a bottleneck of having to wait for developers to, either update it or approve pull requests and all this other stuff, and it became a large, like, pain point. So that's why even like a Word doc, anyone can contribute and anyone can save. Maybe that's also dangerous too. Um, but
Well, I think part of this as well is like it's around looking at the problem that you have. I actually don't think that zero height is or tools like zero height. Other tools are available. I was about to list them off, but then I might get fired if I do that. But like if you're using a design system management tool, I don't actually think that that is suitable for everybody. um, I don't think that it is the de facto that you should go for because it all depends on like how big your team is, how weighted your team is as well. I do think it's a consideration to make in all of these things. But if you've got a small team and it's predominantly designers driving these things, and the devs that you have are comfortable in something like Figma, fuck yeah, like document the shit out of everything in Figma. Like, it's not going to be the most scalable solution as you grow, and you will probably have to cross a bridge at some point to like go into something that is a little bit agnostic. But I do think if you're like small and starting off, like keep your tools light. But even then, I'd probably still say, hey, maybe use whatever your company uses for documentation, whether it's Notion, Google Docs, like whatever it is, whatever the lightest way possible of like getting the tools that people are used to using. Like I'd probably say use something that is, a little bit more agnostic. But similarly, if your team's more dev heavy, like it's not necessarily a bad thing to like use the tools that make most sense for your team. I just think that it's like as soon as you're trying to scale it, that's when you're going to get into issues. And especially if you're trying to like build out teams, um, like having it that you can only hire engineers who are comfortable in places like Figma, or only hiring designers who know how to submit a know how to commit a Jesus, a git. That's the wrong know how to do a pull request, basically, is what I'm saying, or like know how to actually use git, um and be able to like contribute to stuff via code. Like that is massively limiting who you can hire.
yeah, that kind of, I don't know, goes back to like finding people that are unicorns, which they don't really exist. And I think that's
That's
the
why
same
they're
thing as
called
like
unicorns. But yeah.
unicorns are real. But I think that's the thing is like having a tool to kind of like solve all your problems is a little concerning because I feel like you can't do everything really great. Like a unicorn, right? Like,
Yeah.
someone who can design, do front end dev, back end dev, blah, 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 right? Like
Yeah.
it's hard to do those things really well. So I think even when if you want to try to use it, you'll find limitations pretty quickly, right? So um
Are you worried about this with Figma? Like, so I mean,
um
if we look at their
I think,
trajectory, yeah,
I think, like, I am not worried because because, like, I feel like past companies have kinda tried, right? And then and maybe this is the one company that does really well, like, I think of, like, Envision and, like, they kept adding, like, things like Inspect and all these other features,
yeah.
and it just didn't do well, but at the same time, I think, you know, not a lot of products have a long life cycle. Um, depending on like
Yeah.
Sketch was really big at one point and now it's not as big. And it's kind of like I think, do we want to put all our eggs in one basket? And maybe it's not
Yeah.
eggs, but it's like
Oh,
time
it's a
spent,
dangerous
right?
thing. But then again, like it is, I know that we talk to a lot of people where like tool consolidation is like a big decision factor in like what tools they're going to use, and so they do want to consolidate to as few tools as possible. So I can see why it'd be really tempting for somebody like Figma to start branching out into different areas. Like I would be very, very surprised if they didn't do something in the realm of like documentation at some point, because the truth is documenting shit in Figma at the moment is painful. Like I think somebody in the chat already pointed out that like the fact that their versioning is still I mean, to put it in a nice way, it's dog shit. Um, and I'm sure it's going to get better. Like the fact that they did branching is great, but if you compare it to like how abstract used to work for Sketch, or how anything that has like Git style versioning, it's really really hard to like. It's really hard to work at a scale that you would expect in like a company that has 5 10,000 people in it, or like a product team that has anything over like 100 people, if you don't have good versioning. And the fact that like you don't even have things like branched versions, and even I don't know if Figma do major and minor releases on their versions of stuff. I don't think they do, but like that kind of stuff you can't really deal with, like living breathing documentation that is being used by a company if you don't have a way. Basically you end up with like using lots of manual hacky ways to get around that. um
Yeah, I think that's the thing with that Code Connect is like it's still I mean, granted things are new, right? And you kind of have to start small and iterate, but like with Code Connect, you have to manually set everything up. And so the level of effort involved with like tagging and connecting everything, like for like what value, right? Like how I think, if a developer is comfortable with the design system and the components that exist, they'll know what to do. They don't need to reference everything in Code Connect. They can just look at the designs and do that. So if you have like, I don't know, hundreds of components and different variants, what that's a lot of connecting and to what value?
Yeah, I mean, this is this is getting into how useful the feature is, and that's the thing. We do need to remember as well. This is the first version of what they've released, right? So it's like it's probably going to be thought through and made better, and it's in beta as well. So there's
Yeah.
a
And
chance that like shit's going to change. But it's one of those ones where when they did the briefing on it. Looking at it, it's like, oh, this looks easy. And then when you actually look into the documentation, it's like, okay, this is adding extra work. Is it adding much extra work to creating stories out of the components that you're building to put in storybook? Not not that much extra. So it might be something that people are used to, but I don't know, it's yeah.
I feel like because everyone has established tools and established workflows already, it's gonna be hard to, like, transition that
Yeah,
behavior.
it is,
So maybe it's, like,
especially.
one of those things that if you started from scratch, right?
Yeah,
But I think that's also if you're starting from scratch, you're probably at a smaller team, but then some of these features aren't
yeah,
for people using like, smaller licenses. They're for, like, organizational and enterprise plans, right? So,
yeah.
um, I don't know. It's kinda messy.
It is very messy. I think so. There was a comment in the chat around, or it was kind of a question around what source of truth we're talking about as well. And I think this is an interesting area because I think it's something that I've said ever since I've been talking about this is um, the fact that source of truth is such a big ambiguous term, and actually, I really like, even though it's messy, the idea being that you have multiple sources of truth for different things across your. So if we're talking about a design system, there is a source of truth for designs. It's probably in the design tool. Um, there is, or it could be in your documentation tool if it's synced well. Oh, plug zero height there. Um, but similarly, if you're talking about the code, then it's what is in the product. The source of truth is the code because that is what ends up actually what the users use and it's in the product. That is a source of truth for what is currently in the code. I think I think the ambiguous ones there are the documentation as to like what is the thing that we are saying, this is, if you are to recreate this or if you are to use this, this is the thing that you need to base it on, um, which a lot of the times is documentation. And I think, more and more these days, it does get into like tokens as well. And it's like, where is the token source of truth? And I think that that is something that nobody's figured out yet.
Yeah, I feel like source of truth has, like, this, like, stigma attached to it. It can be very polarizing. So and I get it, right? Because I feel like places like different tools will have, like, the most accurate information. I think that's kinda, like, what we're going for with that phrase of source of
Yeah,
truth of, like, what's that actual accurate information that we need to do our job. So, that's why I kind of, like, consider, like, documentation, like zeroheight as your launch pad, right? Like, it's your home base, so you know wherever the content that you're getting from there, when you go out to, like, a
yeah.
Figma component or your storybook, you know, like, that's the legit place to go, so it's like your launch pad where you can't go wrong, so you don't have to scroll around in GitHub and pick and choose and assume, right? So, I
Yeah.
kinda like the not source of truth, but like a launch pad, um, and then, like, launch pads integrate with, like, all your existing shit, right? So, that's kinda neat.
It's really interesting too because there's another sort of following on from that. There was another question here around how much internal team research should you be doing to find out what's the best way to pick what tools you use. Um, and I think because that's the thing, like that concept of a launch pad could be Figma, it could be Storybook, it could be, I don't know, a fucking table of contents in a Google Doc, if you want it to be. I do think Zero Height's probably like one of the better options, or like a design system management tool is like one of the better options for doing that. Um, yeah. But how much effort do you put into actually deciding where that sits, and what's the process?
I mean, I think,
You've
you know,
got
that's
3 minutes.
a okay. So I think the thing is like, you know, think of this as your as a product and you have users and you do like, you know, your basic usability and user research. So it doesn't have to be super extensive, but just make sure you get like a sampling. And that's what I've done before is like talk to designers who are using like consuming the design system as well as engineers and then the maintainers of both code and design just to see like what gets in their way with our current processes, like what are they looking for, what's confusing, and trying to address some of those problems, knowing um, like the tools that you have at your disposal currently, or tools that you could get to alleviate some of those pain points. I don't think it has to be super extensive, like you know, just get a sampling and shared some shared opinions from different
Yeah,
perspectives. Um, because I think that's the thing is like, you know, teams are usually all on the same, you know, have the same like they have the same goals, they have the same, you know, similar mindset. So it's you don't have to do, you know, a 30-person research study. Could be like a
but I
half
think
an hour lunch and learn talk or something.
yeah, but I think even just doing internal survey, like on it's like what the biggest pain points are with current processes, or like the way you do, or even but like if you don't have anything set up currently, like if you'll surely have something that's adjacent, like you'll surely have some form of, I don't know, internal tooling processes that sort of exist in other parts of the business. Um, and it's like figure out what the main pain points with are, and then go to the people who will actually be using this and survey them to figure them out. I remember you had an amazing like internal audit document when it came to like choosing the right tool for design systems specifically. Did we ever release that? I don't know if we did. Did we?
I don't I don't think so, but we could put that up as a resource.
We should. We should.
Because it was a good way to I only
That's
had, like, a handful of people vet the
yeah.
product.
And it's really great because it's like it ran through. I remember using it for like a workshop that I was running, and it just basically runs through like what are your needs, like what are your primary needs, and you go through the tool, and you can really quickly say like you have each sort of discipline lead who's advising you. So you have engineering, design, PM, content. If hopefully you've got it. Um, and you have them, basically say, does this satisfy my needs? And it's like, does it completely satisfy the need, mostly satisfy the need, you know, not at all. Um, and then it just gives you a really nice sort of top level overview to see what trade offs you're making with the tool that you're using. Um, because that's basically all you need to know. You just need to know with sort of eyes wide open what you're going into. Because, yeah, you could use the most expensive sort of tool that's out there. Um, Knapsack. Um, but but at the same time, like you might find that actually for your needs, you don't need like a big design system manager. I don't know why I'm trying to talk you out of using Zero Height, but you might need something that's small. If you're a small team of like 10 people, that might be the best way. Or you might just want to use, Zero Height's free offering. Whereas like for us, I know at least, like there are times where we talk to customers when they're in the sales process and we're like, we don't think you're ready for this. Which, sounds daft because we should take as much money as possible because that's capitalism. But oh, the producer's gonna have fun editing this. Um,
Um, Allison asked a question, which I thought was interesting. How do you
yeah,
ensure folks are using the neutral space as opposed to keeping it in Figma so there's no excuse for folks not to read or consume it? Not that you can ensure folks will read inside of Figma either.
yeah.
I've got designers saying they don't want to use Confluence where engineering keeps documentation. And I agree. I wouldn't want to use Confluence either. It's good for some things, but not everything. Um,
It's not
but
awful. It's what I used at my last place, before switching to Zero Height.
I think a lot of places will be like, try making your documentation in Confluence first
Because
before we spend any more money,
if you're
right?
already
So
using Jira, right? Like it's an easy one to add on. Um, I think it's a. I think part of it is like bringing people along for the journey of like explaining to them, one, actually talking to them and getting what their like pain points out are in terms of using the thing that you want them to use, so they feel like they're being heard, and then getting some kind of agreement as to like, well, these are the benefits of using something that is a shared tool that everybody would like to use, and then sort of moving forward from there, and then it's a bit arduous, but it's just a bit of repetition. It's like having it so whenever anybody shares like a Figma doc with the documentation in, if that exists in Confluence, just being vigilant to just be like, oh, do you mean? And then link the neutral doc. It's the whole like what you want, and there's also a thing around like making the documentation that you have in the tool that you want people to use good. Um, which does take a little bit of time. I think it's like what you eventually want to have is you want it that place is there's almost like a expectation that that's the place that people go. It's built in like feeling, and
yeah,
so when new
it's
people come in, yeah,
It's like a behavior change. So,
yeah,
like, this is for any tool, really. It's like everyone has to kind of modify their behavior a little bit, and it does take some effort. So, it's like that's where, champions come into play, and then, like, kind of being repetitive and saying, oh, for the latest, go to the documentation, removing it from anywhere else and make sure that it's, in the documentation. Creating, I guess, like maybe not good about documentation. I think good, like I feel like some people can put too much pressure on themselves to make their design system docs look like material design. But I think you really want to make your documentation valuable, right? So have it be useful, accurate, to get people to want to go there. And so it's just a matter of really shifting that mindset and creating that behavior change.
MVD, minimum viable documentation. That's what everybody should be aiming for. Anyway, yeah, I think that's the thing. And to be fair, like I think that if it gets to a point where you've been trying this and you've been hitting your head against the wall for 3 6 months and people are still sharing, and you've talked to them and you've said, why are you doing this? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Um, maybe considering that whatever tool you're using currently isn't the right tool. Like sometimes it is about going to where the people are, right? If you're using Confluence, um, talking to those designers and being like, okay, come on, give me your list of the pain points of using Confluence, and let's see if we can find a tool where there's like a nice happy medium, like Zero Height. Uh,
That's literally what I did
that's
because they were
literally,
like,
yeah.
"Use Confluence," and I'm like, "Do you understand how much effort it takes to update an image?" And then if I use zeroheight, I just, like, connect it and magic happens, and then anytime we have to make a change, then it's synced, right? Like, it's magical, and then I loved it so much I came to work here.
It is. It's yeah. I mean, I think we need to end it because we're already over time. But I think I'm a big fan of using the right tool for the right job. I think Confluence is great. Notion is great. We use Notion internally at Zero Height for all of our like internal company documentation and like figuring out what we're going to do and writing blog posts. I don't know. We use it a lot. We use it a lot. Um, but that's because that's what it's made for. It's not made for design system documentation. And it's the same way that like if I was using, I don't know, has anybody tried to use Figma to do like complex illustration work? It's really bad. Like Figma is an amazing design tool, but I still have Illustrator for when I want to do actual illustration work or Photoshop for when I want to do like, you know, photo editing work. It's like Figma is great for what it is intended to do, which is a UI UX tool, right? Yes, you can do those other things. It's never going to be an ideal experience. And I think that it's the same with this kind of thing as well. Use the tool that is right for the job. Don't use I don't know, jackhammer when what you actually need is a tiny little chisel and hammer. It's not going to make anybody happy. You're not going to have a good time. Everybody's going to be sad.
And you could hurt yourself.
I mean, I hurt myself daily using Confluence. So that's it for today. If you have any questions you want to fire across to us for the next episode, or you have any topic suggestions for what you want to hear us talk about, please send them through. You can either do that by joining the Zeros Slack community, which is the Zero Height Slack community. You can find that at zeroheight.com/Slack. You can reach us at on Twitter/X at Zero Height. And you can email us if you're old school at community@zeroheight.com. Next up, we've got Pablo Stanley joining us for an extra special episode about AI and whether it's going to replace us all, whether we're doomed. But until then, see you next time.